And we are live today on Energy Superheroes. We have Michael Barnard today, and he is the chief strategist of TFIE Strategy, which stands for The Future is Electric. Michael's an advisory board member to a company called Flymax, that's a really cool name. He's calling in today from Vancouver, British Columbia. And Flymax is an electric aviation startup focused on aerial tourism. That's a mouthful. I think it's a really exciting concept. And Michael, we're excited to have you on the podcast today.
Oh, glad to be here, Peter. It's a pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you. So tell me more about Flymax. It's an exciting startup, and you're an advisor there.
Sure thing. I've been talking to the Flymax team for months, but they've been in operation for years. The two principals, Tony Bishop and his partner, had a previous electric airplane, Ego. I'm not sure what the implication of a plane called an Ego is. I'd never asked them that question, but it was a one-seater, ultralight, and it was an interesting thing, but they couldn't find a market for it. And so they, at the time, that as a British duo and both pilots themselves, they were looking around at places where the intersection of electric propulsion and business opportunities existed to find interesting niches because it's all market stuff, right? I'll be very clear on this. Electric aviation is completely fit for purpose with pure batteries or hybrid electric for 4 to 100 passengers in propeller driven airplanes right now. And I've talked to startups in most of those categories, but it's going to start out small. And so they said, what about aerial tourism? Flight seeing is a kind of generic term. They said, as we look at they did some market research and they said, wow, it's huge with affluent people, the emerging affluent class in Africa. It's huge with the enormous affluent class in China because if you've ever seen any of the Asian movies out of China, the scenery in so many parts of China is stunning. And then the Great Wall, flying over the Great Wall, that's a bucket list thing. And similarly, India has got a significant emerging economy and as well as the affluent markets in the traditional markets for this kind of thing in North America and Europe. And so they said that's a growth market and it's poorly served by airplanes today. It's mostly helicopters, which are really noisy and disturb everything on the ground. And so they not allowed to fly too low over other tourists and stuff like that or wildlife. Or it's in small Cessnas and things like that with if you've ever been in a light plane, they tend to have small windows that are scratched and they're noisy and they're smelly. I've flown in a lot of small planes, like from here to Victoria as a float plane trip for me. And they stink. They're noisy. You're wearing earplugs. You can't hear anything. And so they said, this is a perfect market. It's a growth market. It's underserved today. That's a perfect place to start with electrification. Not the only place it's going to start. I've talked to flight taxi startups and I'm very large on regional air mobility where I see a lot of light cargo planes electrifying and going autonomous fairly rapidly. But flight seeing, imagine, just put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're in an airplane and it's got a bubble canopy. So you have amazing views for everybody in the cabin and you're sitting on very comfortable seats and you can barely hear the air propellers running. They're A, behind you, so you can't see them. And B, they're electric, so there's no engine noise. And C, there's no smell. You're just a bubble floating through the sky slowly over beautiful scenery. And you're looking down and you're able to have a conversation with your loved ones or your other travel companions. And there's displays telling you what you're seeing and there's audio stuff and that stuff. It's just a really interesting transformation of that stuff for a market that's booming globally. And it fits the characteristics of today. It's fairly cheap. They don't go very far or very long on flight tourism flights for the most part. Let's get up, circle for half an hour, come down, travel not that many kilometers. And so with reasonable standard Tesla batteries, you can service that entire thing. You can charge it up between the times that people get in and it's high margins. We talk to various people. Interestingly enough, in Malta, there's this really interesting opportunity in Malta. Malta, it turns out, is 2 islands. And so all the vacation properties are on the North Island. is only 5.5 kilometers away. And all the people work on the South Island in massive traffic congestion because it's grown so much, especially during COVID. Everybody became a digital nomad and said, I don't have to be in London. I don't have to be in Paris. I don't have to be in Frankfurt. I'm going to move to Malta. And so they're living La Dolce Vita and everybody on a Friday afternoon wants to go to the North Island. They can't get there. It's just very interesting. So yeah, lots of discussions globally, lots of interest out of Africa, lots of interest out of India, lots of interest out of Asia and North America and stuff. So it's going to be interesting to move forward with this.
Sorry, I was on mute there. This sounds very cool. Has Flymax taken any early stage investors or is it currently self-funded?
Currently self-funded. They're reasonably affluent individuals who are founders. They were able to do a previous aviation startup after significant interesting careers. One of them apparently flew British nuclear bombers. I believe that's the part of the story there. So they've had interesting backgrounds. Tony himself recently he got an A. Do you know anything about the history of aviation, Peter?
I'll say a little, going back to the Wright brothers.
There's a famous British fighter plane from World War II called the Spitfire. It was truly an amazing plane for its time, propeller driven, but it was quick, it was nimble, it was amazingly important during Britain's defense in World War II. But most of them have fallen out of the sky or were shot out of the sky. But all those badges exist. And so they actually build complete, accurate replicas of them that fly. And so you actually can fly a modern manufactured Spitfire that's exactly the same as a World War II one, no ammunition. And so Tony was actually flying that along the White Cliffs of Dover. He was actually going up and oh, such a spectacular thought. In the White Cliffs, I stood in France as a kid because my dad was military. I'm an Air Force brat, which is part of my fascination with electrifying aviation. And standing on the beach in France, looking across the English Channel, and there are these massive white cliffs. Just, it's a spectacular view. And so he actually got to do barrel rolls in a Spitfire past those cliffs.
That's amazing. So that's great. You give us the reason why you're focused on electrifying aviation, which I think is super cool, because I think when you believe in something from childhood, it tends to translate well into adulthood and creates a passion in that. So I think that's amazing. What are some of the challenges that you see of electrification of aviation? And what do you think are some of the hurdles that have already been overcome?
It's interesting because I'm actually not just aviation. I actually spend my time projecting more than not pretty much all the major decarbonization problems we have from ground transportation and agriculture and heavy industry and marine shipping and aviation out through 2060 or 2100 and then look at the solutions for them. And so part of the reason that people reach out to me from the aviation space is because I've projected the decarbonization of aviation through 2100, where I've got actually demand curves and all that stuff. Pro tip, the industry is not going to grow as fast as the industry tells you it will, for the simple reason that there's 3 or 4 reasons as we move forward. We have to decarbonize it, and it's hard. Biofuels are the ones are fit for purpose today. We've had certified biofuels for aviation since about 2011, and a lot of manufacturers are certifying their planes on biofuels. But biofuels are more expensive than the fossil fuels we run them on. They're not much more expensive, but they're enough more expensive that nobody's going to do it unless we put a price on the negative externalities of current aviation fuel. But that's happening, right? Europe's doing it. Canada's doing it. The United States actually accidentally was slightly better than that, us, but isn't doing it. They're subsidizing instead. And so there's some transformational curves, and electrification is one of them. So we're going to start with small airplanes like that 4-100 space turboprops, and we're going to move forward. And then we're going to start seeing bigger and bigger planes. Then we're going to get to the point around 2060, 2070, where we can actually fly an airplane across the Pacific with batteries. And then it's going to take another 30 or 40 years before all airplanes are replaced because airframes last a long time. So we've got this interesting curve problem. We've got an economic problem, which is just that it's going to cost more. And that's going to be a major inhibitor. Like you and I, when we look at flights in 10 years, we're going to see a significant increase in the cost because the fuel has to be priced for its carbon problems. Right. And so anything that can go electric actually gets much cheaper and more stably priced electricity, and which is ubiquitous. It's in every airport today. So it's trivial to add chargers in airports today. I'm actually a co-founder of a firm called Distance Technologies, and I'm working with a firm in the United States called Clear Skies to simulate all aircraft landing and all ground vehicles and aircraft starting to electrify over the coming decades, where we'll put the chargers, how much electricity demand that is, those types of things to assist airports in the United States and globally with their strategic roadmaps for this transformation. Because they don't know. I've at least got a perspective. It's imperfect and it keeps getting challenged by really interesting people. And I have amazing conversations with people who work in the industry, aerospace engineers, other nerds like me. And yeah, so the battery electric part right now, today we can put a plane in the air and we can fly a couple of 100 kilometers, like 160 miles, and have some reserve left over. 4 passengers, like a small plane you might see at an airfield, a little Cessna or a Diamond. And as we move forward, we're going to get Heart Aerospace, for example, out of Sweden, is currently doing a 30-passenger turboprop plane, which runs on batteries, but has a hybrid generator in case there's a problem, right? Like we can fly all the core distance, 400 kilometers, 300 miles easily with batteries. But what if you have to divert, get to an airport, you can't land there. There's been something go wrong. Some idiot has flown a drone into airspace and you have to go to the next airfield over. Or you're flying along, you have a passenger emergency and you have to land somewhere. You need about 25% more fuel, more energy to fly than the longest trip you're going to take, just in case something goes wrong. As an example, I was flying into Edmonton for work, Edmonton in Canada. It's quite far north, one winter, and it was minus 42 degrees on the airport surface when we landed. That's actually very close in Celsius and Fahrenheit, by the way. They're both like really cold. The airports, Air Canada, had bought used jets from a Brazilian a Brazilian passenger carrier, and the jets weren't certified below minus 40. So we were circling for 30 minutes, an hour, until the airport warmed up. And if it hadn't warmed up, we'd had to fly to Calgary, which is 100 kilometers away. So that's the kind of thing you have to think about with passenger aircraft safety. And so batteries are great for that flight of, let's just take Calgary to Edmonton. It's 3 kilometers, easily doable with electricity. But if you have to divert and fly back 150 kilometers, you run out of juice. Heart Aerospace's model, run batteries, keep the hybrid there as a reserve. I've talked to other startups who are in this kind of same model. It's just like the transition for hybrid cars. Let's ask an interesting question. You remember the first hybrid electric cars that came out? They weren't plug-in, right? They were just a car with a battery and a generator, and they went downhill. They charged the battery a bit and they switch on and off the generator, but you couldn't plug them in. And then over time, you had plug-in hybrids and parallel. And plug-in hybrids, you plug them in. Jay Leno tells this great story. He had a plug-in hybrid in 2011. It was his daily driver. If you know anything about Jay Leno, he has, I think, 100 cars in a massive climate-controlled warehouse. He has a 100-year-old electric car there. But his daily driver, when he was going to the Jay Leno show, was a hybrid electric plug-in. And he plugged it in. And he drove a year in that thing, 11,000 miles, and never burned any gas. He just plugged it in and he used it. That's the advantage. So you get this transitional period with the plug-in hybrids, and then you get to fully electric. So we're kind of at that very beginning stage in aviation where you can have something like a Nissan Leaf, which, will get you 100 miles. It's a good city car. But if you want to get further, you need a plug-in hybrid that'll get you the next town over, and you're going to be burning some gas on the way. And then as we move forward, we're going to get to the Tesla phase of aviation where, gee, you want to drive across the country, just get in your Tesla and go supercharger to supercharger. And it's actually a really gracious experience along amazing driving roads. But we're not there yet. We're at the beginning of that cycle. So That's the pattern.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So when you're talking about pricing negative externalities, I think you touched on that, and comparing the biofuels of today, how much more expensive are biofuels than, let's say, fossil fuels today on a percentage basis? Just ballpark. And I
Yeah,
assume you mean
it's
like sustainable aviation fuel and that kind of stuff?
yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of discussion about sustainable aviation fuels and sustainable fuels in general. The United States, I was actually just doing some more assessment of rail transport in multiple geographies against the lens of the United States new transportation decarbonization blueprint, as one does with their Tuesday mornings. I'm that guy. And so the there are multiple pathways to burnable fuels that are lower carbon than fossil fuels. And so I kind of look at it through and I've done the workup, the chemical engineering workup because I'm a nerd. I rebuilt my brain as a chemical process engineer a few years ago just to be able to do this. You'd start with hydrogen and oxygen and carbon molecules, and you put them together and you create ethanol. And then from the ethanol, you create more robust things like methanol, or you upgrade them to kerosenes in the standard same kind of stuff. And you can do the same with diesel. Like you can assemble diesel from your raw molecules. So that's one pattern. And all these direct air capture places and are looking at that. If we look at marine shipping, Maersk is looking at green methanol, where you take methanol as just another hydrocarbon, and it's a liquid at room temperature, which is a nice thing. It's lower energy density than it or bunker fuel that we traditionally use, but that's a balancing act. But you have to make the green hydrogen somehow, and that's expensive. And you have to get the carbon somewhere. Where are you going to get the carbon from? These are ubiquitous molecules, but they like to be bound to other things. You have to break them apart with energy from whatever they're bound to. And then you have to assemble them back together in the right format. And you have to do that with like electricity every step of the way. And you're just applying whatever the carbon debt of the electricity is. And so then the other pattern is biofuels. So to get back to your question, and I say a sustainable aviation fuel that comes from the biological thing, lets nature do 50% of the heavy lifting. All plants are made of hydrocarbons or cellulose. It's hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. It's already there. And to make biofuels, you need to know how to make beer or the equivalent. Gee, we've been doing that for 8,000 years as a society. And you need to be able to distill it or distill that lower quality beer into higher quality alcohol. And we've been distilling, it turns out, distilling hard liquor for 6,000 years. And then the only innovation part on this is that you have to then take that alcohol and you have to basically do another distillation kind of process where you turn it into something that's heavier called like a kerosene, right? Or a diesel, right? And so this is the process. Now, as I tell you that process, you say, oh, if nature's doing 50% of the heavy lifting, that's probably cheaper. And it is. That's the nature of the beast. Sustainable aviation fuels are a lot more expensive. The synthetic fuels and hydrogen are a lot more expensive than biofuels. Biofuels are 20 to 30% premium, but that's a lot. The average passenger jet carrier like a Lufthansa or a Air Canada or United, 19 to 20% of their annual budget is for fuel. So you're going to say you're going to add 30% to that. They're going to go, okay, that's problematic. And second question they're asking is, how much of this stuff can I get? And the answer is not much right now, because in various parts of the world, let's take the United States. There's lots of biofuel manufactured in the United States. It's bioethanol made from corn, and it's used for ground transportation. It's wasted there. I said at the beginning that I assess all the different spaces. Well, ground transportation is all going to be electric, every bit of it. If we take the train example that I was talking about, so 83% of all of India's trains are grid tied electric today. 83% India. And they're aiming for 100%, except for a couple of tiny heritage tourist tracks. China is at 60%. All their rail is electric, and all of the 40,000 kilometers, about 30,000 miles of high speed electrified rail they built since 2007, that's freight and passenger, is grid tied electric. Europe is at 72% of all their rail is grid tied electric. Meanwhile, the United States is percent. Interesting fact, the United States is number one for miles of rail in the world. You have more rail than Europe, you have more rail than China, you have more rail than India, which is cool. You're middle of the road for freight. You're about 10% of the next geography for passengers, which doesn't surprise any American or anybody who knows anything about America. But your other outliers at 1% of electrification. And the new transportation blueprint the United States has come out with, it's looking at burning stuff, hydrogen and burning fuels in its trains. It's a complete outlier globally. Like the rest of the world is going to have fully electric rail. The United States is still going to be burning stuff for no apparent reason. So when we talk about, it's just, I'm triggering something there.
There's a lot to unpack there. The only thing I would encourage the audience to do is just look at that the United States has reduced its carbon footprint significantly over the last number of years.
Yep.
Check the numbers. Just by transitioning from coal to natural gas, we've made a huge reduction in our CO2 emissions. If you compare that to China and India, their overall CO2 emissions have increased substantially, and they've continued to add coal-fired power plants. So I know it's trendy globally to sort of bag on the US, but I do have to stick up for the US in terms of, I think, taking advantage of the low-hanging fruit of decarbonization.
I will acknowledge this, but I'll also say that transition to natural gas, the United States also has the leakiest natural gas network in the world. Second leakiest, there's the stands, which are worse, but 3.5% of volume of natural gas methane leaks upstream. And that adds about the same CO2 as burning it in a combined cycle gas thing. So it's about as bad as good, very good coal. So it's not as good news a story as we like to think. I certainly was all for it. How little can we build? How little time can we use it? But it's a necessary bridge fuel. But it's become more problematic as we understand methane leakage. And that's true globally, by the way. It's not a United States sole.
Well, I would agree with that. And I was happy to see in the Inflation Reduction Act, they added a significant cost adder for methane leakage. And so we are seeing in our practice a number of companies that are developing very technologically advanced sensors and schemes to take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act costs that are going to be added in terms of methane leakage. So I think the IRA is a huge step in the right direction. And the only thing that I can say is since that was passed, money has flooded into the United States. And I also see Europe and Canada scrambling to pass similar types of legislation. So I think that was a big leap forward for the US. It was a long time coming, but fortunately it passed with bipartisan support, and it has achieved the goal of unleashing a lot of investment in terms of decarbonization in the United States.
Oh, absolutely. To compare and contrast to China carbonized faster than any economy in the world. It became the manufacturer for the world. And now it's bending the curve faster, but they made a choice and they were clear about this choice. They took 850 million people out of poverty first, and now they're decarbonizing. I don't judge the United States. I don't judge China. They made a choice. They were transparent about the choice. I publish a lot on China's progression. The 40,000 kilometers for high-speed rail is a data point. 60% of all EV purchases are in China. They're moving, and they had to move in part because their air quality was so bad. There's multifactorial stuff. Their air quality in 2010 was about as bad as New York's and LA's was in the 1950s and 60s. Yeah, so they're decades behind the West transformation to clean air. And they're moving fast, but that's the real nature of the beast. So every part of the world has different parameters, but the electrification of aviation and transportation, we can look around the world and see what makes sense, right? And we can look around the world and see comparable areas, and we can compare and contrast the choices that are made. And I'll say that anything that we can electrify, it's low-hanging fruit. Simple reason, if we build a lot of renewable electricity, as the United States has done and is doing more of, especially the IRA stuff, and then we move those electrons through wires of very high efficiency, HVDCs, like 3% losses for 600 miles, right? That's a long way with very high efficiency. And we put it into batteries that return 80 to 85% of the electricity and turn it into forward motion for cars. We waste a lot less energy and it costs us a lot less to move cars along roads. That same pattern holds for pretty much everything. If we can make heat from electricity with heat pumps, we save a lot of energy. We waste a lot less. If we move trains with electricity, we waste a lot less electricity. And we have to build all that green electricity. So the less we waste, the better off we are. And so it's one of those obvious balancing acts. I've got a short list of climate actions that will work, which is read broadly, and I present on, I do keynote speeches and stuff. I help people with strategy stuff by understanding the framework. And the first thing is, build lots of renewables. And the second thing is electrify everything. And that's why my company is called The Future is Electric. There's places where we can't use electricity. But the first question is, can we use electricity? And the second question is, can we use electricity? And the third question should be, what do you mean we can't use electricity? It's only in the fourth or fifth questions. Okay, we can't use electricity. What should we use instead? That's the pattern. You should ask really seriously how you can use electricity directly 3 or 4 times before you allow alternatives to enter the question.
I definitely appreciate your perspective. I'd like to ask you about a couple of cases that I
Sure.
think are interesting. So I think there's one very promising technology in terms of
Mhm.
electrification that I hear a lot about. And then there's, I think, one challenge, of course, that gets repeated quite a bit. And so I'm going to start with
Mhm.
the positive case. Tell me about vehicle to grid technology because I see it, I understand it basically, but I hear a lot of positives about V2G.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because I actually have a projection through 2050 of the various V to G cycles and how much it's going to penetrate. Because if we think vehicle grid, let's just take me, for example. I live in a 330 stall condo in downtown Vancouver. I'm on the council, and my initiative is to try and electrify all those stalls, of course, right? Big surprise that I joined the council to move that agenda forward. And so you kind of look at that and go, oh, okay, that's a lot. How are we going to do it? But then the question is, oh, so I live in a condo building and if I had a car, I don't actually own a car right now. If I had a car and was plugging it into the basement, how would the condo be intermediated with the utility to deliver electricity back to the grid? So that's question one. And the United States, I've had this conversation with the Mark Z. Jacobson and Bill Nussey, who are great, amazing people. I recommend you get them on your show if you haven't. Bill Nussey of Freeing Energy and Mark Z. Jacobson, of course, 2050, 100% renewables by 2050. But they live the American dream. They live in big detached homes in the suburbs with solar panels on them. And I think at least one of them has Powerwall from Tesla. And Mark Z. Jacobson, of course, has an original Tesla Roadster, right? It's like the suburbs of the future. But only 0.8% of the global population lives in detached suburban homes like the United States, right? It's an easy and accessible thing for Americans to think more people in the world live like that. And in Asia, 90% of people live in multi-unit residential buildings. So statement one is the pattern is very different. Statement two, so that means that as you get into this space, this first question you ask is, what do we do with all that charging? The first thing is aggregate it and diminish demand and reduce spikes with smart charging, right? So in my building, as we put it in, all the vehicles that are going to be plugged in, if we get up to 200 or something, we don't want to have a massive spike at 7 p.m. where everything is charging. We're going to flatten that spike across the night. I want to push it outside of peak electricity rate loads. And we're going to manage that with computers and stuff. So the first thing is you're going to see everybody doing smarter time charging to push demand into the middle of the night. You might have a lot of wind energy, or there might be a bunch of hydro, or the nuclear plant might be sitting there going, hey, my electrons, please, as nuclear plants have to do in the middle of the night. By the way, this is massive amount of pumped hydro built globally to give nuclear plants something to do at night. It's a very funny story, but we have 170 gigawatts of pumped hydro capacity globally. mostly built near nuclear plants. So the first thing is smart charging is going to reduce demand peaks. And that's just going to happen because customers don't want to pay. Do you have an electric car, Peter?
I don't know.
Okay. But if you get one, are you going to want to charge it when the rates are high or are you going to charge it when the rates are low?
Of
Little
course,
timer.
when the rates are low. I'm actually a good candidate for an electric car because I
Mhm.
commute a short distance and then my car stays outside and it could be charged. It's not being used. So it's an easy one for me.
Yeah. And that's true for most people who have cars. It's Burbs are a harder target. Detached homes are an easy target. Electric cars are more expensive. The demographic purchasing of cars in the United States, if you have a home, you're going to buy a car. If you don't own a home, you're much less likely to buy a car. The statistics are rock solid.
I did look at one
And
though. I just got a Jeep Wrangler and I live down in Florida and what's
okay.
nice about the Jeep is you push the button and the top just goes open. So you've got a really nice, it's great. And
Uh,
they do make an electric version of it. And so I did look at it and it was about 20,000 more. And I think
yep.
if the interest rates had been low, I might have opted for it. But
Yeah.
interest rates have gone up so much. And I think that's actually an interesting sort of byproduct of the current monetary policy is
Yeah.
that because electric vehicles are more expensive in terms of the capex expenditure compared to the opex, if
Yep.
interest rates are high, it makes them artificially more expensive than they would be
Yeah.
under the previous regime. But we could probably have a whole conversation about the, let's say, fairness of keeping interest rates low for a very long time and sort of the inequalities
Yeah.
that come from that. But just flat out higher interest rates, I think, hurt the electric vehicle market more than the general car market, which it hurts the general car market, but
Yep.
the electric vehicle market gets hurt worse by high interest rates.
Absolutely. And we could have an entire conversation about the cognitive science of CapEx versus OpEx as well. It's a fascinating topic. But as we look forward at vehicle to grid, returning to that, the first is consumers are just going to plug in and put timers on. The second is buildings like mine are going to manage that over the night, flatten it out. The third is, though, that utilities are going to look at 20 or 100 megawatts of demand from electric cars and say, what if we could turn that down instead of buying more electricity? What if we could send price signals, which they do with peak kilowatt pricing? 25% of my building's electricity bill is because peak demand is expensive, right? So we actually are living that. We need to manage that. But the secondary is right now, utilities reach out to pulp and paper mills in British Columbia in 5 megawatt chunks and say, we have a control on our little green screen application. We're going to press that button and your plant is shutting down. Right. And so as we think about the major networks like ChargePoint, you can say, oh, what if ChargePoint aggregated all of the demand for, say, what city in Florida do you live in?
So I live very close to what I think is a world class utility. I'll give them props, which is Florida Power and Light, owned by Nextera. And I live in Jupiter, Florida, which is close to Juno Beach, which is where Nextera's headquarters are. And I would
In that
say,
case, I'm gonna go with a city though, because the Jupiter. I lived in Florida for 3 or 4 months on a project. I'm gonna go with one of the bigger cities, Jacksonville. Say Jacksonville, the utility that services Jacksonville might be Florida Light and Power, but say Jacksonville, ChargePoint has hundreds or thousands of chargers in Jacksonville and services a bunch of multi-unit residences and the waterfront towers and stuff like that. And the utility and ChargePoint get together and the utility pays ChargePoint to reduce demand, right? So instead of burning natural gas or there's just a problem with solar because it's the middle of the night or something, but the utility reaches out and gives ChargePoint money to reduce demand. So this aggregated electric car charging with smart chargers enables demand reduction to plug into facilities and approaches utilities already do. That's the second of the three strategies, right? Is
yeah, and it's a
consumers.
good. So the good news is it sounds a lot like demand response, which the utilities have been
Yep,
perfecting for a number of years. So it's just they used to do it with commercial customers. And you had sales guys running around to commercial operations and aggregating the
yep,
demand. And now you're going to have it done with banks of EVs that can provide that solution. So it takes it to the next level because you could never do it with, let's say, aggregating homeowners. I think people tried to do it. Like you could probably do it with maybe some internet type solution, but it was never able to be done. But by having those vehicles, you do create that effect, so to speak,
Yeah.
is move it to the
And,
next level down from commercial businesses down to consumers that use less power, but you aggregate more of them. So now you have a significant sort of battery resource or a resource that the utility can call on as needed.
yeah. And all the fleets as they electrify are going to be easy aggregation of that kind of demand response. So then we get to what people think of as vehicle to grid. And I'm going to separate that into two chunks, vehicle to home and vehicle to grid, right? Vehicle to home actually makes a lot of sense for people who live in detached homes. Once again, it's that small percentage of people who live in suburban or rural areas. The F-150 Lightning pickup truck from Ford, amazing because you can actually run a home on it for a couple of days. You can't run your freezer and a couple of things, just keep them closed. You're not going to be doing the dishes with it. But if you have an outage in Texas and you live in a ranch home in the suburbs, an F-150 Lightning will keep the lights on. It'll keep the air conditioner running during the daytime or some heater running in the nighttime. That's a pretty useful thing. Vehicle to home makes sense for a niche market. Now, for me, though, imagine if I live in a 19-story condo building, amazing location, 5 minutes to the seawall, blah, blah, blah. But still, vehicle to home makes no sense in a multi-unit residence. Who's home, right? Am I going to share my electricity with random Joe down the street? No, we'll just buy more electricity and I'll leave the electricity in my charge. And that gets to the next problem for vehicle to grid. I mentioned cognitive science. There's something called prospect theory. You ever read Thinking Fast and Slow by
Yeah.
Kahneman? Great. Okay. So this is and for anybody who's listening in, if you haven't read Thinking Fast and Slow, you really should. It's great. Kahneman is a Nobel Prize winning, he won a Nobel Prize for economics, even though he's a psychologist. And he did it because economics has this kind of fallacy called homo economicus, which is useful for simplistic economic modeling. It pretends that human beings are rational decision makers in all things. We seek all the information, we weigh all the options, and we make the most intelligent decision possible. And look across the street at your neighbor and tell yourself that's true. Don't look at yourself because it's embarrassing to look at ourselves through this lens, but look at everybody else. And you know that's a simplification that's useful for economic modeling, not an actual reality for human beings. Kahneman and Tversky, what they did is they spent a bunch of time as psychologists saying, how do people's brains actually work? How do we actually usefully make decisions? And so the thinking fast part is how we normally do it, where our brains are lazy. And so we just leap to assumptions and they're good enough 80% of the time, 90% of the time. And so we move on. Our brains are stuck in hunter-gatherer mode in the savannah, but we live in a world. So that's just the reality. Thinking slow, if you get out a spreadsheet or even an envelope and you're writing calculations on the back, you're thinking slowly, you're trying to make rational decisions. So this becomes important for vehicle to grid approaches. So statement one, vehicle to grid probably doesn't make sense in a multi-unit residence. It makes more sense in a detached home just because of the way the economics thinks. Right? That one's an arguable point. But vehicle to home leans into what Kahneman won his Nobel Prize in economics for, prospect theory. Prospect theory, he did a bunch of evaluations and he said, oh, human beings hate losing things more than they like getting things. We fear loss more than we value gain. So if you have the opportunity to win $1,000 or lose $100, you think of them as the same level of emotional equivalent and you make decisions around them when you're thinking fast that way. Now, day traders and poker players, like I played a lot of Texas Hold'em, train themselves not to have prospect theory be a natural thing, but everybody else it is. And vehicle to grid says, I as a utility want to buy electricity from your car. Oh, I'm going to lose rain. Oh, what's it worth to you? It's worth more to me to keep my range than it is for you to give me $5 or $3 or $2 or 50 cents, right? So the vehicle to grid part, the economics feeding into consumer psychology means that the utility would have to pay very high rates for electricity that it's probably just worth putting pumped hydro in or a mega Tesla mega pack and ignoring this consumer psychology problem and just deal with businesses for this stuff. So I don't think vehicle to grid. So once again, consumers going to flatten demand just because of price signals. Then we're going to see smart charging in buildings that are going to flatten demand. And then we're going to see aggregated demand response. And then we're going to see people with detached homes will use vehicle to home. But even in a 4 apartment home, you can't, a 4 apartment small MERB, you can't plug in your lightning and power only your apartment unless you're on a extension cord through. So it's solely for detached homes, which is fine. There's a lot of people who live in detached homes. It's not a trivial market, but that's really the only vehicle to home space that starts making sense. And then vehicle to grid, I think, is going to be a long time coming, and it's going to run into these problems. And I've looked at a bunch of examples in Europe and other places where they've done testing of those. So that's my vehicle to grid story. I'm sure it was longer than you expected, but as I warned you, brevity.
A lot of detail regarding thinking fast and slow. You should look at the Elliott wave theory, which shows how the stock market goes up in 5 waves and down in 3 waves. And the reason is because people fear loss more than they enjoy gain. And so the market goes down faster than it goes up is the bottom line, which is interesting. Unfortunately, it's a very good back view tool, the Elliott wave theory, but it's not a very good forecasting tool. It doesn't, I wouldn't advocate it for traders. And I'll throw out the disclaimer. We make no financial advice on this show, but the reality is that I think that theory dovetails nicely with the whole Thinking Fast and Slow book, which is what I was thinking about when I read it. So the other question I'll ask you about, and we're getting towards time here, but of course we see a lot about in the news these days and in all different publications. These days you have to say news with a grain of salt. So I always look at both sides of it. I consider myself a centrist, but you do see both from, let's say, the New York Times and Fox News conversations around the challenges with mining for rare earth minerals and batteries and these to create the batteries, the raw material that you need for the batteries, which are going to be required for electrification. And so what are your thoughts on that? How do we overcome that challenge? Do we onshore the mining to, let's say, overcome, say, some of the challenges that you see in Congo is always the country that people mention and I don't want to trivialize it because it seems like a pretty big deal, but this is not my area of focus. So I'd appreciate your opinion around that. What are the challenges today and how do we get around those challenges?
Sure. So I'm a big denominators guy, right? There's numerators go on the top and then there's the line and the thing on the bottom is a denominator. I always have to try and remember that. It's like credit versus debit. Which one is which? So the denominator means what are we dividing it by? What do we compare it to? And so a useful comparison is to the amount of fossil fuels we mine annually, mostly just to burn and turn into CO2. This energy transition is because of that problem. The amount of fossil fuels in coal, oil, and natural gas that we extract, process, refine, and distribute is orders of magnitude bigger than all of the metals required for all electrification. Because that's statement one. So annually, we suck more out of the ground than we need for all of electrification. The second thing is, so the scale is something we've done and we do. It's vastly smaller than cement and concrete, by the way. Cement and concrete is actually the biggest mining thing in the world, and it dwarfs everything except fossil fuels, which are absurd. So the second statement, though, is let's take a Tesla battery. It's got lithium in it. The big question is lithium. That battery lasts 8 to 12 years and just sits there. The lithium doesn't degrade. When that thing comes to end of life, we can take it out of the car, we can extract all the lithium and make a new battery. Lithium is a highly recyclable material, and all metals are. So once we've extracted it once, we see some degradation over time because we have to do a bunch of chemistry and processing to refine and make them clean again. I was speaking to a global steel expert yesterday about that exact subject. And so cobalt as a metal and the other things, the lithiums, they're heavily recyclable. And so that's statement 2. And we are seeing significant recycling. We have a battery waste problem right now because I'll just hold up my watch. There's an Apple Watch. It has a lithium ion battery in it. It's tiny and it's hard to aggregate all those tiny batteries. But when we get to transportation and grid storage, that scale of battery, that's a bunch of lithium that's worth extracting. So that's statement two. Statement three is just ended an amazing couple of years as a strategic advisor to electrochemistry company that does CO2 based redox flow batteries. Redox flow battery, by the way, couple of tanks, something like a fuel cell in between. Liquid flows through in presence of electricity, makes a higher energy liquid over on the other side, and you flow it back, you get the electricity back. So it disaggregates one of those little battery cells or D cell or a C cell and makes it into tanks of liquid and stuff in the middle. So yeah, great working with Agora Energy Technologies. I recommend people go look at them. Amazing stuff. But that meant that I spent a ton of time looking at battery technology and battery chemistries, battery tech incremental alternatives. I looked at lithium ion, lithium phosphorus, the new cattle batteries, all these different technologies. And I know that we have, and I've looked at vanadium redox flow batteries, zinc redox flow batteries, iron air batteries, aluminum air batteries, and we've got CO2 based batteries.
By going through that list, you defined why it's so difficult to choose investments in the battery segment. It's not an area, I'm an investment banker by day, and it's not an area we've been able to get involved in because it's so difficult to pick a winner, even for the venture world that makes its success on betting on a lot of technologies. It's a really hard space to invest
Yep.
in because there's so many competing technologies. And I would have thought by now, because I've been in the industry since 2009, where they started building a lot of utility scale solar, and everybody knew that you were going to need batteries to back it up. And so since then, since I got into the industry, we've been having this conversation about battery technology. And I
Yep.
would have thought by now we'd have a standard. I wish we could just pick one and put all the resources towards one standard or two standards for maybe for different use cases. But that's just a challenge when it comes to allocating capital to the battery sector.
Yeah. I'll go back to my time in Singapore, 2013, 2014. An international global firm that hired me as a transformation executive and transformation architect for up to $1 billion programs, systems engineering stuff for major clients around the world. They sent me to Singapore for a couple of years. And so, of course, being in Singapore, what I did is I joined the local Singapore paragliding club because I paraglide. That's kind of like the long, thin parachute with lines going down and you can actually fly with it. It's a paraglider, not the one towed by the boat. And so, of course, you fly to Bali and I've flown the southern cliffs of Bali for 90 minutes with nothing but fabric and string. It was very cool. But one of the women who was involved with that was a lithium ion PhD researcher who worked for a global battery company. And her stuff was nanoscale sensors in lithium ion batteries to enable understanding, avoiding thermal runaway. And that is it's micron scale stuff. And that is incredibly valuable. I'll compare and contrast to Christensen and Rayner's The Innovator's Dilemma. Book you've read, I assume?
That one I haven't, believe it or not, but
Okay.
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. I would recommend reading the book because the IBM hard drive description argument is the interesting one there. For the listeners, The Innovator's Dilemma is you're the major person in a field and you've got the most demanding customers and you've got the best product and somebody comes in with a crappier product that you do. They take away your bottom 10% of your customers because they don't need your amazing product. And you think, great, I don't have to service that crappy customer. My profits actually go up. And then after time, the crappy product becomes better and it takes off another 10%. And then all of a sudden you don't have a product. So Xerox photocopiers versus the desktop photocopiers that ate them, digital cameras versus Kodak. The examples go on and on. But the IBM hard disk description is an interesting one. You may remember this, Peter. I remember this. Seagate actually used to buy IBM hard drives to replace them, and they made an artificial reef off Boca Raton with old IBM hard drives. So, Florida connection.
I
But the
was in
IBM
the
hard drive story.
absolutely. It was in that building there, and it turned into an ISP. One of the early ISPs was run out of that
Yep.
building there. It's an amazing sort of bomb-proof building that kind of looks like the Pentagon, where they developed the first PC in Boca Raton.
Yep.
Innovation is coming back to Florida. Miami's booming, and Florida's an exciting place these days, most that I've ever seen in my life.
Miami's an interesting place. Florida's an interesting place. As I said, I lived there for a while on a contract. But to finish the story, IBM, one of the case studies in Christensen and Rayner's The Innovator's Dilemma is IBM's hard drive business. Because at a certain point, they sold it, except for the read write head. They maintained that single component themselves because it was the high margin component in the assemblage. And so for people dealing with batteries, one of the things I say to them is one of the key places to think about is the membrane. The membrane is one of the most expensive parts of it. It's nanotransmission of ions. It maintains dead spots. There's an immense amount of innovation going into it. Has to survive under a variety of different electrical and pH balance things. And it has to survive for 8 years, sometimes with acids on one side and gases on the other. And that's a space of tremendous innovation, including nanomaterial deposition. One of the companies I spoke to actually was trying to, they're a long way away from it. So, I can't really speak about it much more than this, but they actually had structured nanomaterial deposition. So you had equal pathways and you didn't get dead spots is the hypothesis about that. We're going to see a lot of transformation there. There's a couple of other places. So you don't look at batteries or materials necessarily. You look at where is the unique intellectual capital within it. But you have to be really nerdy and you have to go a long way in and you have to be someone like me who actually enjoys figuring that stuff out and has a STEM background because it's really hard otherwise. And there's a lot of BS in the space. I'll just say Energy Vault out loud.
There's a tremendous amount of BS in the space for sure. And I'll say investors, and this is not something I spent my whole career starting companies and then became an investor later. And it's not something you appreciate when you're in a company. Investors have very short attention spans not because of that they're that way by nature, but because of how many deals. And when you see so many deals when some of those deals are incredibly complicated and take a longer time to evaluate, it just makes it more difficult to get over that first hump. Because once you say, okay, I'm going to dig in on this, that could take literally years. If you can't get over that first hump in terms of the complexity factor, it does make it a challenge. So I think battery companies also have to do a better job of presenting why their battery is unique and better than other batteries, just in those simple terms. We've been quoting books here. Read Michael Porter's Competitive Advantage and focus on that.
Yeah.
Anytime you're pitching. So that's just a tip for startups is focus on competitive advantage before you focus on science, because many investors have science backgrounds, but it's more the attention span from seeing so many deals that makes it a challenge if you lead with the science.
Even more than that, even if you have the science, like batteries, most batteries are electrochemistry. And I spend a lot of time with PhDs of electrochemistry. And I'm a nerd who rebuilt his brain as a chemical process engineer. I have PhD chemical engineer nerd fans. Like literally people who say, I really loved your case study of carbon engineering, because you're right down there talking about moles. Yeah. But electrochemistry, it's alchemy. It's spooky action at a distance. How is this happening? Ions are traversing a tiny sheet of what's effectively plastic, and radical transformations are occurring on either side of that tiny sheet. And electricity is stored, or things are transformed, or we can manufacture bicarbonates. And how is this happening? It's hard. It's very hard for even STEM literate investors to understand what's going on inside batteries, because they're one of the hardest domains of chemistry. So finding people who can actually understand them and break them down and do that. I think the VC firms, two aspects of this. One is VC firms have been trained by, especially in the United States, have been trained by Silicon Valley to want breakout software plays. And they don't deal particularly well with non-software plays. Thiel's efforts around energy, for example, were laughable. He just didn't get the domain. He didn't understand the physicality of the infrastructure or the denominators associated with it. So people like Daniel Fong, I think it was over at Lightsail, I believe it was, they thought they could disrupt energy in the same way they disrupted digital stuff. And they're not the same. The second problem is that deep tech is different than most other forms of tech. Deep tech, you're a TRL level 1, 2, 3, 4 for a long time. without any certainty, you'll get to Tierra level 9, technology readiness level. And so deep tech has long, long investment periods, needing lots of material characterization. And now we're actually accelerating a lot of that with machine learning for assessing materials and the intersectional points where we might find something. So we can actually run physical tests after the simulate, after those hypothetical things. We're accelerating advances in silicon for solar panels. We're advancing exploration of different medical and chemical combinations for batteries, doing all sorts of stuff there. But a full stack developer who can actually do that is worth millions a year to a company. And there aren't that many of them because it's like the machine, that stuff is like the equivalent of electrochemistry by itself. So we're depending upon some transformations. I will say for grid storage, we don't need any of that. The vast majority of grid storage today is pumped hydro. We have vastly more resources than we need. It's easy tech. We've been doing it since 1907. And it's actually by far the biggest form of storage being built globally on the grid anyway. It's just an untold story, but it's an infrastructure play, right? It's not a tech play. Anyway.
Absolutely. That's why we focus on climate, energy, and infrastructure, because the energy transition is a physical problem, 51 billion tons of physical stuff, and it's going to require deploying capital across both technology and infrastructure in order to execute on it.
Yeah, we're getting close to the end here, but I want to do a bit of a shout out. There's just a really interesting time. So it's February 7th. And today, a book that I think everybody who deals with big projects and the energy transformation and energy policy needs to buy. It's called How Big Things Get Done. And it's by Professor Bent Flyvbjerg. Peter and I were laughing about it because I had to learn how to say Flyvbjerg. And when I talked to Bent Flyvbjerg recently, he said, I'm an IRA Dane because I got it close enough to write. But the book, the reason I was talking to Bent and his co-author, Dan Gardner, who co-authored Super Forecasting with Phil Tetlock, also a fascinating book, less useful. But the reason they reached out to me is because I'd done a bunch of publication about types of energy infrastructure deployments in China. They wanted to include that in chapter 9 of the book, so it's in there. But that book is published today. Now, if you want to actually understand what types of major infrastructure projects, dams, nuclear, wind, solar transmission, tunnels, bridges, roads, which actually have lower cost and schedule risks. He's got a database of 16,000 of them that he and his team have assembled over 25 years. And he's actually got statistical analysis of that. And so he tells a lot of great stories. Dan Gardner made sure it was an accessible, not academic nerdy book. It's the most accessible book on project management and project success. And hence for investors in the infrastructure place where they'll have lower risk capital outlays, where they'll have higher risk capital outlays, and how to ensure the people delivering on it avoid many of those risks. So that's a great book. I strongly recommend it, not just because my name shows up in it, but my name does show up in it.
No, that's exciting, Michael. I'm going to get it. How Big Things Get Done. Is that right?
How Big Things Get Done. And Gardner is much easier to spell, Gardner, than Flyvbjerg, Flyvbjerj. So if you look up How Big Things Get Done, Gardner, you'll find it.
No, that's exciting. Head over to Amazon or wherever you buy books to check it out. Michael, it's been a pleasure having you on today. This has been Michael Barnard. He's the chief strategist at TFIE Strategy, which stands for The Future is Electric. And he's an advisory board member at Flymax, based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. And he's given us a tremendous amount of information and things to think about electrification and how we decarbonize, because I think that's a goal that we all share in common. So, Michael, thank you for being on today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Peter. And I'll say one last thing to your audience, which is my dance card isn't full. I've always got time for another conversation with people who are struggling with where to put their time, energy, and resources today. So it's still a value in the 2030s, 2040s. I do that with institutional investors, VCs, startups, and major infrastructure developers. This is like part of my professional service. Please reach out.
Very good. Do that. Thank you, Michael.